You're listening to On Mission with Dr. Matt Davis, a podcast designed to explore the personal mission of everyday leaders. Hear from men and women who are making a difference in their corner of the world and discover what keeps them on mission.
Welcome to On Mission with Dr. Matt Davis. I'm Jonathan Sheely. Joining us today is Dr. Doug Backorik, the Director of Music Studies at Bob Jones Memorial College in the Philippines. He'll be joining us on campus in the fall semester as the chair of the Department of Music. Doug and his wife Ruth live in, I should have said this before, Quezon City, Philippines. They have 5 children, 2 sons-in-law, and 1 daughter-in-law. His first job was teaching in a public high school. Doug's favorite meal is Bachorik Barini spaghetti. His hobbies include motorcycle riding, scuba diving, and all things music. His favorite sport teams are the Oklahoma Sooners, Minnesota Vikings, and Twins. Dr. Backorik, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
You better clean up the pronunciation of that city.
Yeah.
Quezon.
Quezon, yes. And you will
Good
be
guess, though.
relocating to a state that has all kinds of fun to pronounce cities.
Yes.
And there's a whole meme out there of just people trying to pronounce the cities of Wisconsin. And Oconomowoc is right around the corner. And, of course, Waukesha, Waukegan, and Ixonia, which they literally named by pulling letters out of a hat.
No.
Yes, they did. And so we got all kinds of fun. Do you know any fun Wisconsin towns?
Some of the ones up north are good because they are Native American. I don't even try them. I'm just like that one.
Spell this out. Would you just read that, please?
This is what Google Maps is for.
So we had an awesome opportunity to get to know each other a little bit on a missions trip back in 2018 where I brought a group from Maranatha, and we had the privilege to serve together a little bit and minister in church and see the city a little bit as well. I appreciated so much your willingness to take some time out of your busy week and just kind of play tour guide a little bit. And we had some adventures. Do you remember doing the Segway adventure?
Yeah, that's the first time I've ever been on one of those.
Actually, let me pull this up. So Evan was a little smaller then. All right, that's my son Tim in the middle.
Lydia.
And Lydia, I think she was a sophomore in high school, and I believe she's
right,
graduating from Maranatha this year. So it's been a couple years. Evan got I was jealous. He got the sit-down version, and it rained that morning. I'd never been on a Segway. I about wiped out, and my life about ended. But again, it would have been a good story. So,
and it's all cobblestoned roads around there too, which
Yeah.
doesn't make it very easy to roll around.
Now I can't remember. Did you do it?
Yeah, I did.
You did it too. We were in
but I think
the
I was in the
second
back
tour.
batch, or
You
maybe
were in
the
the
first
very
batch. I'm not sure. Yeah.
back.
Do you have a GoPro on your forehead?
That's James Rossiter, and he does. He has a
Yeah.
GoPro stuck to the top of his
I'll have
helmet.
I do
slip
use one
him
on my
a $100.
motorcycle though, to get road footage and scuba diving.
Use
we
the
take one
GoPro?
down with us. Yeah.
Yeah. Eric Fausto's in there, and Lexi Buckles. Yeah, we had a good group. That was a tremendous trip and an evangelistic opportunity for us. The Philippines is a unique place because they speak English. They're so friendly and welcoming to Americans.
Yeah.
And
Very
I know
warm.
there's a history there of why, but
Yeah.
that's a wonderful place to live and minister.
Yeah, it's been a real blessing. The openness and friendliness, and even a willingness just to engage, even about spiritual things in conversation. Very easy, generally, to start conversations and have conversations about the Lord, and often a genuine kind of curiosity, even on people's parts, about, okay, well, you believe this. What's different about your group and our group, and things like that open up really some unique doors. I know your team had some amazing opportunities where they were
in the schools, public schools.
Yeah.
Yep, we did the ministry with Mike Reddick called the E-Campaign, and they have worked over the years to get open doors in the different public schools and invite American others. Actually, we had people from Singapore and all over the South Pacific. So it was awesome opportunity, not just to see the culture, but to engage in ministry and do that. And the Philippines considers itself a Christian nation.
Right.
But that's more of a cultural marker than a personal reality, I found.
Sure. It's the only country in Asia that is predominantly Christian of some type, mostly Roman Catholic, of course, because of the Spanish colonial period, because Spain ruled the Philippines for about 350 years or so. Mm-hmm. And they came with the sword and with the cross, basically, when they came in. There's a strong evangelical Christian population, probably around between 10 and 15% of the population. So still a very needy place. One of the exciting things, though, about the Philippines is that it is really becoming a mission-sending country now. The evangelical and fundamental churches have gotten very serious about both church planting domestically and sending people out to other countries, especially within the Southeast Asia, East Asia area. So probably the days of, foreign or American church planting missionaries is kind of waning there. There's still certainly open doors for that. But more and more Filipino churches are really taking that up and doing it and doing it really effectively. So it's kind of that's one of the things we've been excited about with what we've been a part of in the Philippines there, training national believers for ministry, and they can do it so much more effectively.
Manila is such an amazing, huge population, dense area. 21 million, I think you said this morning, in that greater Manila area. When we landed in Manila and came out from the airport, it was the most astonishing scene I think I've ever seen in my life, where we walked out, and of course there are guards, military guards with probably unloaded, but scary looking weapons and guarding all the entrances. But just the press of vehicles and people and just going every which direction. And then we got into what was it called? Not Uber, but
some Grab.
Vehicles, yes, we had to get a different app and call ride service to get to the hotel, and that was a whole other experience that I kind of messed up. And my first act in my first missions trip as the leader was to split my team into three completely, we had no communications at that point. I just split them up. And then I said, I had seen in the app how much it should cost. I had all the money, the cash.
No. Oh, no.
And so I said, well, this is what this is going to cost, this is what this. And I gave them just enough money. And I put my wife and three of the team members in one car, and James and Anna took another car with a couple others. And then I got in the last one. By the time I got to the hotel was about 15 minutes after the first car got there, because I understood my driver to say, do you want me to go on the road or up on the
like
tollway,
the
skyway? They both said yes. I said no, because I asked a follow-up question. I said, does it cost more? And he said yes. I said, we can go down on the road. Well, remember, I had given them enough money for the road version. That means there were two very angry cab drivers at the hotel when I arrived, because I had given my wife the equivalent of about $2.30, and said, here you go. And she had no ability to pay this man. And so I rolled up, and I'm seeing everyone's looking at me like, what do I do? I mean, we're all here, aren't we? Did something happen? And they're like, you need to pay them some more money. So I didn't know the exchange rates or anything. I'm just peeling off, and the guy's like, keep them coming, and so eventually I probably way overpaid, but
they probably made a nice bonus on those.
I was just thankful everyone arrived alive.
Listen,
know what I mean?
You were the product of conversation at somene's dinner table.
Oh, no doubt.
You should have seen this American. He starts, right.
You should have seen the wad he was carrying.
I hate to say it, you probably played for their drinking party that night.
Oh, don't tell me that.
Oh,
no, don't tell me that. Well, they were very friendly and easy to get hold of after that. So anyway, we had a great time, and I appreciated your hospitality. You lined us up to be able to serve in some churches, and it was wonderful to meet Christian brothers and sisters on the other side of the world that worship the same God with the same joy to serve the Lord. And it's just eye-opening and wonderful to see God is working all around the world. All around the world. We get so focused on what's happening in our world. And maybe it's good, maybe it's probably it's bad. But, man, get your eyes up and see what God's doing around the world. It's life-changing. Yeah. Well, right here at the beginning, Jonathan's going to hit you with a deep question.
Yeah, and you mentioned, what your ministry has been for several years now. But we want to know, what's your personal mission in life?
Whoa, that's a big question. Well, and I shared this in the assembly earlier today. When the Lord was calling us out of secular work, academic, and kind of the classical music realm into full-time ministry, we were really praying about a passage of Scripture that would be kind of like our fundamental passage, kind of a guiding light, if you will. And the Lord eventually led us to 2 Timothy chapter 2, and the opening verses of that chapter are an exhortation to faithfulness to the Lord no matter what. And I have a ring on my hand that was passed down to me. I don't know if that could be seen in the camera or not, but it has like a Roman soldier's profile on it.
Mm-hmm.
It's been passed down in my family a couple of generations. And I've used it kind of as a reminder of 2 Timothy chapter 2. No man that warreth entangleth himself with the affairs of this life, that he may please him who hath chosen him to be a soldier. And I suppose, I don't know if I would call that a mission necessarily, but in a way, it kind of has been to be willing to do whatever God wants us to do, go wherever he wants us to go, and to whatever that means in terms of separating ourselves or disentangling ourselves. That word, I guess, is a really potent word, to be willing to disentangle from whatever would keep us from following the Lord, being obedient to him. So I guess maybe in a way that's kind of my focus, to try to stay obedient to the Lord.
Have you always been a musically focused person, or how did music become such a big part of your life?
Yeah, I will tell you, grade 5, elementary school, I went to my first live symphony orchestra concert in Orlando, Florida, and I was blown away by it. And I thought, that's what I want to do. And I already knew in grade 6 I was going to join the band, because I was in public school, and anyone who wanted to got into the band in 6th grade. And I was going to play trumpet because we had a trumpet around the house. So it wasn't one of those things where I gravitated to the instrument that I loved. It was like, okay, we have a trumpet. You can play trumpet, you know.
You can play whatever you want as long as it's
trumpet. I know, because I actually really wanted to play clarinet. And my parents said, well, no, we can't afford that, but here's a trumpet, you know.
Yeah,
good call.
I told my boys, no woodwinds, no strings, okay. I got to live through this, okay. Brass, we're going brass. No percussion.
You know, it's ironic. None of my kids play brass instruments.
Okay.
I've been a very bad father.
Yeah.
I pawned off all of that to other people to train them. But in grade 6, then I did join the band. But I went back to hear that orchestra play again. And that time, I started watching the conductor. And I was hooked. And honestly, from grade 6 on, I knew I was going to be a conductor. It's crazy. I wish I could say I prayed about it, gave it a lot of thought, but I knew. And honestly, from then on, that my course has been in that direction. And that's been a huge part of my work as a musician.
What is that like, to conduct a really powerful, maybe it's a symphony orchestra, just, people who are musicians, each one in their own right and in their own voice, but coming together like that, and now you're responsible to sort of help it all work. What is that like?
Yeah, it's amazing and it's frustrating. I mean, the work that's involved, when you see a concert, you're seeing the end. And what the conductor does in the concert is, of course, important, but what's really important is what happens in all the rehearsals beforehand. That's where the real work takes place. And I got to work under a lot of fine high school conductors, choir and band and whatnot when I was growing up. And watching them work in rehearsal, the interaction, the connection, as well as the music making, all of that was just so powerful. As a conductor, I guess for me, one of the greatest joys in conducting is that I am facilitating other people making music. In the end, the conductor isn't the one making the music. It's the band, the orchestra, the choir. And to me, that's one of the greatest joys about conducting. I will say, though, that it is really cool when everything comes together and it's exciting. I've had a chance to do some big things over the years, as well as kind of more normal type music, and conducting something like I did the Dvorak New World Symphony many years ago back when I was in Minnesota, because I conducted an orchestra there. And, that's just one of the coolest things you could ever do,
Yeah.
A lot of fun.
Were you ever in band, Jonathan?
I was.
What did you play?
I played tuba in high school.
Tuba.
Yeah.
I played the trombone in
Trumpet.
band.
So, yeah.
And in my experience, the band director was always exasperated.
Especially at brass.
There was a lot of yelling, sighing, pointing, demanding. Okay,
shaking.
it wasn't fun. I didn't have a lot of fun in band.
No, you didn't.
And then
have fun in band?
mysteriously, someone stole my trombone.
No.
Yeah, it
you're
was very
kidding.
sad. That was the end of my trombone career.
That's
and
terrible.
my
That is
parents
awful.
believed that I had
Misplaced
something to
it.
do with that. I did not. I
Bottom
swear
of a
under
lake
oath.
someplace.
I left it at school in May, and when I came back, it was gone. So,
Oh man, that's
But-
And the
terrible.
lesson learned is you should have taken it home and practiced all summer.
All
Oh,
summer
yes.
long, yeah.
what was I thinking? That's a shame. Well, and thus ended my instrumental musical career.
And you
uh,
settled for lawyer.
Well, God had a different path for me, but that's what's so fascinating to me because my brother, who is a musician, it's so much a part of who he is, and that's why I asked the question
Yeah,
to you:
yeah.
is that it's music has a way of just becoming, and
Yeah.
identifying. People identify with it, and you spoke to this a little bit in the assembly, the power of music
Yeah.
to do that. It's transformative.
Sure. And I've counseled young people over the years that they should not go into music as a profession if they can be happy doing anything else. So if they can be happy making a living some other way and then do music as an avocation or something, do that. But if you're going to die if you don't spend your life making music, then you probably ought to go into it as a profession, because it's as I think it was Frank Gabeline said, music is a jealous mistress. It takes so much of you. It consumes, to be
Yeah.
good and effective at it. It takes, the hours and hours, and it's really a commitment of your life in a way. So
You never really arrive.
no,
right?
you're
There's
hopefully
always
always growing. Yeah.
Another pinnacle, another mountain to climb.
Right.
Another,
Right.
something
And
to
I
master.
have had the privilege to meet a couple pretty fine conductors, like at the top in the choral world. Dale Warland is one of the great choral conductors. And one time he was conducting in Minnesota, and he did a festival at the college where I was teaching one time. And then a year later, I happened to be down in Minneapolis attending a choral concert of a European choir. And Dale Warland was sitting down in front of me a couple rows, and the whole concert he was sitting there with his pen out, taking notes on the performance, writing stuff down about I couldn't see, I tried to see what he was writing, but writing about the pieces, writing about the tone quality of the choir, interpretation and whatnot. Here he was, this was a man literally at the top of the field, continuing to learn, pushing himself. It was a real lesson for me, and I've tried to follow that and hopefully try to keep growing as a musician.
And God created music, and it's in some ways it's a gift that we have, a gift to us, but it's also theologically a gift that it's something that we can give back to God and worship. So in that sense, God doesn't need us, right? I mean, he doesn't need anything from us. He's the creator of the universe, but yet he wants us to worship him, and it's something that we can do that glorifies him. So in that sense, it has another element of its power is in its use in relation to the creator.
Sure. It's an amazing way to work out the image of God in us, and I know theologians are very divided on what that actually means, and probably no matter what we do, we'll never fully know in this life what it means, but certainly a part of that is the ability to create or to take what God has given and then make things out of it. And that's really, what music is. God, the way I kind of describe it is God invented the very concept of music, and he also created all the elements of it. And human beings have the ability to put all of that together and make things that are beautiful in their own way. Even when we're working with what we might call secular music, there's, human beings can make music that, even if it's not about God or not meant for a worship context, can be somewhat of a revelation of God's character, his beauty. We can capture that in sound, and it helps us, if we have a mind to receive it, it can help us actually understand a little bit better the nature of God. A darkened mind can receive the beauty and understand that there's something more going on there, even though they don't fully grasp or accept that it's God behind that. But for us as believers, when we come into contact with really beautiful, well-crafted music, that's just another piece of the puzzle that helps us understand the nature of God and kind of feel him, not just understand intellectually, but feel him as a whole person.
Or not.
Or not.
And you pointed
Right.
out as well that done improperly, there's some dissonance, that some disconnect between the message and the music. That they're both giving a message, but that was a very powerful point that I want to definitely explore a little bit as we go through this. You gave a general assembly today, and music is a controversial topic. Everyone cares about music, but that care, that concern, that passion can lead to lots of conflict and disagreement, especially even amongst Christian people that have to wrestle with principles of Scripture, because we don't get a playlist from the Bible. And so as we wrestle through that, you gave some principles for us to consider in those choices that we make, both privately and sort of corporately in our worship dynamic. And I want to ask you to talk a little bit about, you said that there are two primary purposes for music, and that there's really no conflict between these two when they're done properly, that they are complementary of each other, and that they are to edify ourselves and others, and to express our praise and thanksgiving to God. So there is both an outward and an upward dimension to our music. Just so you get a little feedback, that was really helpful to me, because many times I feel that there's a conflict or a wrestling of the variety or even the repertoire that we put together between these, that there's a set that might be more worshipful focused, but that there's really is a time and a place for the edification side of it, that we encourage each other and we express our commitments, and we encourage each other to keep them.
Sure.
And so those two dynamics, I wonder if you could talk a little more about those two primary purposes that God gives us for music.
Sure. I think one of the reasons we have so much conflict or disagreement about music and worship is because we sometimes don't have a proper view of what worship is, what's going on in our public worship. And, different Christian groups have very different ideas about what's supposed to happen, what they're actually trying to achieve. And the biblical concept of worship is, and I think that Mark Herbster maybe talked about this in his General Assembly, that our purposes for worship, excuse me, what we see as the biblical idea of worship is very different from what is often practiced in many Christian groups. And because of that, that leads to different choices for music. Because if you're trying to achieve something like, say, a mystical or powerful experience with God, where worship means having a visceral kind of engagement with God, where you feel God coming into the room and you feel his presence, and because of that, then you've worshiped. If that's your perspective and your goal in worship, well, you're going to look for musical styles that create that kind of experience.
That's one of the things I want to ask you about. So you're talking about music that can create an atmosphere, right? It's emotional. It's the experience of the senses. So
Sure.
I don't want to use the word sensory. Okay, put it that
Right.
way. It sort of provides the bed on which everything else is sort of resting or growing, and this then is combined usually with other sensory elements. So I've seen where even in a church there's a musical aspect, but then there's also fog that comes in and the lights come down, and then there's a whole other kind of
it's meant to be really kind of all enveloping,
Yeah.
kind of visceral, sensual, in the sense of all of the senses being involved. And in a way, musical experience is always a fully engaging experience. whether it's the kind of worship you were just describing or a more traditional kind of setting, we still have our visual surroundings, the lights, the experience.
Both of them
always
exist within an environment and a
Right.
context, and that's what I wanted to ask. Is that I don't think that it's wrong for the believer to be in a setting where the lights come down and there's a musical atmosphere that's created, and that there's stage lighting and things, but that might be a theatrical performance.
Right. There is a way to
yeah.
use those things that borders on manipulation. And that's, I think, where when we as Christians use music and the worship experience as a manipulation, we're coming to a dangerous place. By manipulation, the way I kind of defined it is where an experience is, kind of evoked in a person, either without their realizing it or in a way that's overcoming their conscious choices. So they are experiencing something not because they chose to, but because of how everything is being put together around them. Now, there's certain forms of Christianity where that is acceptable. People want to be manipulated into that experience. And when we look at the use of music and in worship in the scriptures, we don't see that. We see an engagement with truth. So when music is used in a way that doesn't push us to engage with the lyrics, think about them, process them, and then respond to them, then we're getting into a territory that's really bordering on unbiblical concept of music and worship.
You used an example playing a well-known song in lots of different genres or styles musically. I can remember the first time I was confronted. I grew up in a fundamental Baptist church that, we had a piano and an organ, and anything else was a little suspicious. All right, we didn't hold the microphones. We didn't listen. We didn't sing along to canned music. There were some ways that was talked about. And so I wasn't exposed to a lot of that until I remember the first time I heard the song "Fairest Lord Jesus," okay, which I knew, sung in almost a nightclub singer, breathy, romantic kind of a way, and it was jarring to me. Right, like this doesn't go with that, or this communicates something really different when it's sung that way. And I thought it was an extreme. It wasn't a rocky, it wasn't Christian rock music. It was just like, wow, like vocally, it seemed inappropriate to the lyrics.
Yeah.
And is that what you're talking about? There being kind of a disconnect between the performative aspect or the musical aspect and the lyrical.
Yeah, and that brings up a whole nother issue. A moment ago we were talking about music either helping us or discouraging us from engaging with the words themselves. The other big issue is what you just described, where the music is actually stirring up in us feelings and thoughts that are not fitting to the lyrics. And that creates kind of you could call it a cognitive dissonance, where I'm hearing, something in the words and I'm hearing something else in the music, which will either cause confusion or it'll cause us to misinterpret the words, because the music creates this kind of emotional context for the lyrics. And we interpret the words through that kind of musical background, or the musical emotional background. And when music has been created, and the way we do music isn't just about notes on the page, but it's the lived experience as well. And when you've got music that was created in a certain way, and the actual experience is created in such a way to focus on the words and to reinforce a proper response to it, then you've got something really powerful for good in our experiences.
So we've talked about kind of the one way you can sort of fall off the road is to create that mismatch, or that the music doesn't reinforce the lyric side of it. There are a couple others that are usually raised in this context. One of them would be kind of the exact opposite side of the road, where it's sort of beauty only, or beauty for its own sake. And we see this in the more liturgical context, where they may even be singing in a foreign language that nobody really knows. And maybe it's in Latin or in German, and this is an English-speaking church, and it's sort of what we might call the high church mode as well. And really, I suppose the principles that you're talking about would apply to that as well, and say, really our music that we sing and use in this context isn't just beauty for beauty's sake.
Yeah.
In that sense either.
Yeah, I think there's two things going on in that situation. One is that perhaps the musical language and the lyrics are not really understandable or graspable by the congregation. And we do have to be careful that the kind of music we use can be understood. 1 Corinthians 14 is really clear on this. Things have to be understandable. And that even applies to, I think, to musical language. So we do want to use a musical language that's approachable by our church people, that's accessible maybe, that's understandable. That can't be the only guide to our decision making, but it certainly is a part of it, and an important part. And the other thing going on there, I think, in some of those churches, you've got an example where you might have some of the most beautiful music that's ever been created, done beautifully, but the teaching behind it, the kind of the theological environment in which that music is being performed is not pushing people towards biblical truth. It's the experience of beauty that has been elevated. And I love the experience of beauty, but when we elevate it to a point that's equal to God, and when we do that, it's never equal for very long. It always goes above. It's always a challenge. Anytime we raise something to be equal with God, ultimately it becomes more important than God. And when beauty gets elevated to a place of equality or beyond with God, then we have a problem, even though the thing itself, the music itself, is not problematic. But our purpose in our purpose in using it, what we're trying to take out of it, is not appropriate, because it's in conflict with God Himself.
So how does that work then with instrumental music that doesn't even have lyrics? Does that communicate something as well, right? I mean, so does that mean it's really also has moral implications?
Yeah, every kind of musical sound communicates. This is one thing that we do see in Scripture over and over again. If you survey every reference to music in the Scriptures, you will not find a single example or evidence of music being a neutral thing. It is always communicating something. Now, it is not communicating kind of on what's called sometimes a propositional level. It's not you can't get John 3:16 out of a piece of instrumental music that doesn't have lyrics attached to it. What you can get is a sense of the nature of God, or you can get a sense of beauty. You can be different kinds of emotions can be stirred up in you, and thoughts. Some of that has to do purely with the musical sound itself. Some of it has to do with the cultural environment, your personal background and experiences, the place you grew up. All of that plays a part in that, as well as just the hard musical sounds themselves. But all of those things combine for us to always take something from any piece we listen to. We're taking something from it, something that is stirring up emotions primarily, according to the Scriptures, but also thoughts.
So I guess the question comes back to the morality of the what's communicated. And they talk about music being like a universal language. And I think you've done some study of this culturally. Are there universal uses of music that cultures who may even be disconnected from each other have common elements to use these things to communicate a common message or theme? Or is it truly just the current cultural associations of a thing, and maybe in another culture it really wouldn't be morally on the same dimension.
Yeah.
You know what I mean by that?
Yeah. It's actually pretty much always both at the same time. I'll give you a quick example on the universal side. Excuse me. If you were to survey the music of various cultures that's used to send their armies into battle, and you listen to the military music of various cultures, you're going to hear a variety of sounds, a variety of instruments, but you're also going to hear a number of elements that are very similar. You're going to hear that it's loud, it's percussive usually, the melodic lines are going to be quite jagged, it's going to be fairly repetitive, rhythm is going to play a big part in the overall sound. There's 4 or 5 musical elements there that are pretty much universal to any culture when they're sending their armies into battle, because those kinds of elements put together, usually high-pitched as well, those kind of elements put together tend to stir up a sense of aggression, a sense of, maybe even anger, that is healthy in a way if you're sending people to face death.
Necessary.
Yeah. And you're going to find that across cultures. So there is kind of a universal level that's involved that has to do just with the physical nature of musical sound. Musical sound ultimately is vibrations in the air. And those vibrations hit your ears. And all of us basically have the same hardware. So when those vibrations hit our ears, it sets off things in our mind.
Isn't that astonishing?
Yeah, it's really amazing.
What a creative design.
It is. And it doesn't matter where you live.
Wireless communication.
Yeah. And it doesn't matter where you come from, when you live, what your background is. Our brains are all wired basically the same. Now the fall certainly, messes that up for some people here and there. But overall, we all receive music kind of neurophysiologically the exact same way. And so at that level, there is kind of a universality. Lullabies would be another great example. If you looked at lullabies around the world, you're going to find 5 or 6 musical elements that are exactly the same, basically cross-culturally. There will be differences, of course. Maybe the scale, the instrument that's used, use or non-use of harmony, things like that, but you're going to find common elements. Then the cultural side comes in where it brings variety, and culture does play a role in this as well. So when we hear music, we're always hearing it both at that kind of fundamental universal level and through a variety of filters that are embedded in us.
Yeah, because our experiences drive our interpretation. That you talked about, that context drives interpretation, and that context could be something that's experiential. So I have a friend who didn't grow up in church and had a pretty rough life and got saved later in life as an adult. And when he hears songs that I hear, he associates them with the nightclub scene, with a part of his life that he doesn't really want to dwell on and think about, and he's turned his back on. And yet the music is so powerful. You can be sitting in a department store, walking through a department store, and something comes on, and it's just like, I haven't heard or thought of that song in 25 years, and immediately all the
Takes you
words,
right
and you're back there.
Yeah.
It's amazingly powerful to be able to do that. And I don't think it would do anybody any good to ignore those realities and take them into account when they're making decisions for a corporate body.
Sure.
That you might think about what the different contexts might be of how that might be received. And it's not just a decision that's made in a vacuum.
Right. And, there are kinds of music, when it comes to worship, there are going to be kinds of music that are completely appropriate to it. There's going to be some kinds that are not. And then there's going to be some kinds that, because of a cultural situation, may or may not be useful in a particular setting. So that means that even in day-to-day life, there may be certain kinds of music that we look at and we say, this is innocuous, no problem with this, but maybe because of something in my background, maybe before I was saved, where there are associations with ungodly living connected to that music, even though the music itself is not really a problem, where I might end up needing to restrict myself from that, not because the music itself is bad, but because what it's doing to me, kind of in a very idiosyncratic way, is a problem. Whereas another believer might say, no problem. with that. I came face to face with that once years ago, giving a talk in a church, and a gentleman, I was giving a talk on music for fun, relaxation, things like that. And then I played a bunch of examples of what I felt were appropriate kinds of secular music, fun music for life. And one of the examples I played was Julia Andrews singing "These Are a Few of My Favorite Things" from Sound of Music. And this gentleman came up to me afterwards and he said, I can't listen to that song. I can't listen to Julia Andrews sing that song. And I couldn't think of a more, kind of innocent, innocuous song or even way of singing it, And so I said, why? And he said, well, but before he was saved, he watched a lot of movies that had stuff in it that, as a Christian now, he knew were wrong. And one of the movies he had watched was a movie that Julia Andrews was in, and she appears topless in the film. And so then later on he got saved and put all that behind him, but every time he hears her voice on a recording, his mind snaps back to that experience. And and of course what I said to him was, don't ever listen to Julia Andrews. There's nothing wrong with that recording, nothing wrong with that song. My mind doesn't go to that. I never saw that movie. No problem. But for him, it was. And so sometimes these decisions that we have to make are going to be, some of it based on an individual situation where, okay, this is not a problem, but it is a problem for me. So I'm going to restrict myself from it. And then we need to be sensitive to that with fellow believers too.
Yes. And even corporately, the associations that music might have today will change in time.
Sure.
And that doesn't mean that we're sort of drifting along with the world. I don't want to do that. I don't want to become more and more worldly in our music. That's a hard word to define, but it's like I know it when I see it. Yeah. I remember one of the evangelists that was here a few years ago said, they grew up with that word, don't be worldly. And he was always trying to analyze it. And basically it came down to, don't wear a black T-shirt. That's worldly, And I thought, okay, now you know.
If it was that simple, that would be nice.
Yeah, it's not that simple.
I need to throw away a few T-shirts when I get home.
But again, that was for him in his context.
Yeah.
So there is a variable context. And there is
Sometimes
a personal context, and there's a corporate context, but there's also a time element to the context, whereas an older generation would immediately associate a certain song with a certain movie or a certain bad element.
Right.
The newer generations might associate that song with a playful meme or a kids movie, or something that's a happy thing totally innocuous. And so in that, there's another principle here of not just discernment for myself and intentionality with the choices, but also in deference to my Christian brothers who may not interpret it quite the same way that I do.
Sure.
And I think we could maybe grow in that area as well.
Yeah, I think you're right. And even, I guess I've always called it kind of the weaker brother principle.
Yeah.
That there are times where something that is completely fine, I'm going to have to restrict myself because of the impact it might have on a brother or sister in Christ, or where it might cause confusion about something. So sometimes there may be music or songs where we might restrict ourselves from it right now because the use of it would either cause a problem or cause confusion. And so we will willingly set that aside for a time. And then there may come a time down the road where that association dissipates, where the confusion is no longer a possibility. And then we say, all right, now I've got the liberty to use this because I don't see any potential harm in it. And so that
is one of the hardest things I've encountered in leadership of an institution is knowing how institutionally to navigate that timing issue.
Sure.
And it's always easier to just not do anything, not make a change. But if you don't grow, if you don't respond to the real context, you can actually end up doing more harm than good if you don't constantly consider that element. And again, I don't want us to be worldly. I don't want to follow behind at a distance because really, as we began the conversation, our highest goal and ideal is the standard of God's word and God's character. Yeah. And if we keep that in mind, I think it really will help make a lot of these other decisions come into focus.
Sure.
Yeah, for sure.
It's tough to know, when is that association dissipated enough so that it's not problematic anymore. And I think that the answer to that question can only come within each local church, with an institution, where we decide, okay, within our context, within our kind of cultural context, if you will, this remains a problem or it no longer is a problem. The piano, for many years, the upright piano was not allowed in churches,
right.
because it was the instrument of bars,
Yeah.
saloons.
Oh, wow.
And local churches, churches that were Bible preaching churches did not use the piano for decades. Well, there came a point where some pastor said, well, I don't think the connection to the bars is so direct anymore. And I'm sure that had to be tough, and he probably did catch a lot of grief about that. But those kind of decisions can only be made, I think, at the individual institution and local church level. And we have to certainly, I think, have grace with each other in those areas where the thing itself we recognize is not problematic in its own nature.
What about for someone who says, I'm really not musical? So most likely they probably already tuned out from this podcast. But
come back. It's okay.
But for somebody who says, it's not my thing. I'm kind of tone deaf. I have a hard time. I can't carry a tune in a sack. So what role does music have for the believer beyond just those who can identify themselves as musicians? And who maybe don't get it, help that person understand the role, even biblically, for music and how unique that is, even within Christianity, for the participation of the entire church and not just, those leaders up front.
Yeah. Well, music really is a fundamental part of our human nature, I think, and our existence. In Genesis 4, we read about the first 3 human professions after creation. One of those is keeping animals, husbandry, food. One of those is metalwork, technology, tools, etc. And then the third one is music. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting to me that at that very early stage of human society and the establishment of humanity on the planet by God, that music is seen as a fundamental part of life. So even for the non-musician or the person who isn't so consumed about it as I am or others are, it's still a core part of their life. That's why music can be such a hot button issue and so divisive, because even people who don't consider themselves musicians are passionate about it. They have music that they love and they have music that they despise, and not much in between. It's either they either love it or they hate it. I think because God made us to love music and to be involved in it. We need it almost like we need food. I wouldn't go quite that far, but almost. People fill their lives with music somehow. Businesses, their homes, their churches, everywhere we have music. For the Christian,
it sticks in your head.
Yeah, it does move us.
I was with one of the choirs last weekend. All week long, one of their songs is just stuck in my head on repeat, and I'm in a way I'm meditating on that.
Yeah,
and I'm glad it's a really good truth,
song,
that I'm stuck with. But it just has that ability to grip us, hold us.
Right, and it can be such an amazing power for good. And that's the other thing then, is that even non-musical believers can engage in music in a way that is beautiful for them and beneficial to them. Just from the standpoint of discernment and selection, Philippians 4:8 is so foundational to this, that we're supposed to fill our lives with things that are beneficial to us, things that are lovely, true, of good report, things that are reinforcing right thinking and right feeling in us. Whether we're listening to it or engaged in singing in it, it's a powerful tool for good. But because we're fallen, we live in a fallen world, we're fallen creatures, it can equally be a tool for wrong feeling, wrong thinking, stirring up emotions that God's word tells us to control or even suppress or even put aside, or that are allowed only in certain contexts within life. So music can, be used in a wonderful way, or it can be used in a way that actually is detrimental to us, even spiritually.
Well, I am looking forward to the opportunity for us to serve together full time starting this fall. And you are a wealth of information and experience with this. We could explore lots of different aspects of your life and ministry and the things that God has taught you along the way, and I'm sure we'll have another opportunity to do that. But God has called you and your family to make a pretty radical change and a move, and we're going to be praying that that goes smoothly, and just rejoice with the opportunity to serve together. And thank you for your time today. This has been tremendous.
It's a lot of fun. Thanks a lot.
Amen.
Thank you for joining us today. On Mission is a production of Maranatha Baptist University. Subscribe to On Mission on Apple, Google, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Don't forget to leave a review, as this will help other growing leaders find these conversations. For information about our guests, previous episodes, and general information about On Mission or MBU, go to mbu.edu/podcast. Join us again next week as we examine what keeps leaders on mission.